Hello, if you or a loved one are in possession of nuclear weapons, please aim here, because I believe it's better to be vaporized in my sleep than to live out the days and weeks suffering through nuclear fallout. If that doesn't get me, I still believe the former is better than living in a wasteland with tribes of people that will not learn from their past mistakes and continue to implement things that make our current timeline terrible, which is what we'll be exploring in Metro, which is a post-apocalyptic survival shooter set deep within Moscow's metro system. The game contains many great things such as action, a beautiful atmosphere, stupid sexy Russian thirst traps, and chasing children down dark alleyways. Don't know how they predicted EDP 445.
I beat the fuck out of my dick.
But if you are someone who plays any of these games, appreciates a challenge but also loves to immerse yourself in the game's universe, this game is right up your alley. It especially applies to Stalker, since there might be a couple of moments that make you say, hey, they copied this, and it's no coincidence since both games are made by Ukrainian companies, and some of the people that worked on the original Stalker games went on to develop the Metro series. But one game is an open world that gives you the freedom to basically do whatever you want, while the other is extremely linear. But all I'll say is that this is one game series just like Stalker where I'm kicking myself for neglecting it for this long. This is also the Redux version, which has some quality of life improvements and is made in a newer game engine, but the original, which I couldn't get my hands on a copy of, definitely has its own charm. You also need to play this on the hardest difficulty to get the most out of it. But let's move on to the story, and if you haven't played it, I've left timestamps so you can skip the spoiler sections. The story has you take control of a semi-silent protagonist called Artyom, I apologize if I butchered that, who is an orphan and has spent most of his life underground with a couple of vivid memories of what life was like above it. I say semi-silent because he does narrate the story, but it has also led to some cheeky jabs by other characters saying he's not the talkative type.
He's from the exhibition. What, can't he speak for himself?
But right off the bat, you're exposed to the horrors of the Metro as you walk through your hometown of Exhibition. After it was attacked by the mysterious Dark Ones, who are alleged to be the next stage in human evolution, as they have mutated from radiation and can now fuck with people's minds. You walk around and see injured people, hordes of refugees trying to find a safe haven, poverty, and this is all coupled with the beautiful and dark lighting as well as soundtrack, more of those later on since these things definitely help with the dreary atmosphere. But you meet a ranger named Hunter who tells you need to get to the center of the Metro at all costs to get their assistance in fighting the Dark Ones. You depart from your home and will now embark on a dangerous journey with an uncertain outcome. But after fighting your way to get to the next station, you celebrate with your mates, and that's when she catches your eye. A stupid sexy Russian thirst trap with anime proportions. Clearly the devs knew who the target audience was, but right after harassing the local child population, and I also had to meet a drunk named Bourbon who ironically enough says he'll give you his kalash if you get him to Dry Station. I mean, good on him for trying to get help with his addiction, Lord knows I need it. Before you embark, you meet her, and this is when I was getting a little confused, some confused sexual energy, because she said she had a surprise for me. It could have been many things, a rare shiny Pokemon card collection, a giant schlong, but no, you just get robbed, which to some people might be the better outcome, but onwards you go with your journey. This is where you have your first encounter with the surface, Moscow, a city that was once full of life, beautiful architecture, a massive history to to it has been reduced to a snowy wasteland that is now controlled by mutated beasts. Here you trudge your way through Moscow to get to the next metro station, but once you reach Dry Station, Bourbon gets captured by bandits, and this really highlights some of the nice gameplay because you can go loud and proud, or you can stealth and find hidden routes to get around the enemies, which in some situations you might get moral points by sparing some humans.
Maybe get their families and go to Ganza?
You know what happened to those who tried.
Bastards.
Bourbon's death is honestly kind of comical because he has a gun pointed at the guy and I'm just screaming at him to pull the trigger, and for some reason Artyom's, whose deadliness rivals the courier from Fallout New Vegas, just stands there and watches him get shot in the face. But despite taking a bullet to the head and multiple other gunshots, Dmitry Glukhovsky, I apologize, says that he's only stunned, and this also explains why you get negative moral points for shooting his lifeless body. But you know, I'm not going to complain, I kind of like the guy even though it seems a little bit unrealistic. But this is where you meet Khan, who is an older eccentric fellow who knows the metro system better than anyone, and thankful that you have him because this is where you encounter some of the weirdest things, which include anomalies, ghosts that have to live out their death day after day as they are stuck in the moment. If you get too close to them, you'll join them. But you'll eventually reach Armory Station, which is built below an old weapons manufacturing plant, and it is also controlled by communists. The second game in the series goes into more detail of the, should I say, geopolitical situation of the metro, but to summarize it, you have communists and you have fascist and other minor free and allied stations. But I think the whole commentary is that regardless of the two, your perspective is the same, that being the underside of a boot, and the only difference is the iconography of the person that feels the boot. Each obviously commit human rights violations, have mass paranoia, and both want total control of the metro to either rid the world of inferior people or build communism, which will also rid the world of inferior people who don't conform. But I'm not going to get too political, but whenever I think of communist, especially modern day, I just think of that one Twitter post, and I'm sorry for bringing it up again, but a concerning amount of them want to work with children, and they also think that they can just sit around, make coffee, and do nothing. You'll eventually get captured by the fascists and are rescued by some rangers, which also leads to a cool railcar segment that has you mowing down hordes of them and evading a literal panzer. But you eventually meet a young boy whose uncle was killed by mutants, and you have to take them to safety whilst also dodging holes in the ground that will lead to you getting instantly killed. And I like the little RPG elements sprinkled throughout the game because you can take or refuse a payment from the woman, and these moral points can affect the ending that you can get. But now that we have reached the center of the metro, Polis, a bustling metropolis, I suppose that's why it's called Polis, it does not seem to be in dire disarray like the other stations, and after all this effort, they refuse to help you. Thanks, guys. Thankfully, the Rangers will help you, which is a faction that is led by Colonel Miller, but we must get to a secret facility that will allow us to nuke the Dark Ones, ending the threat to the humans of the Metro. Something war never changes or whatever. But to get this facility, you need to find the location via secret archive in a library, which has led to some of the most horrifying gameplay as you try to deal with these tank-like creatures called Liberians, who can really only be stopped if you keep your crosshair over them. If you look away for a second, you can literally feel your butthole pucker as you panic to run away in the dark, hoping they don't annihilate you. But you get to the bunker, and now you must get on top of this giant tower to set up a laser tracker for the rockets. And I hope to God you don't have vertigo, because while the view is beautiful, it can make you a little sick. But right before you set everything up, you have to go into your own subconscious to try and run away from the Dark Ones, who try to stop you from sending them back to the Stone Age. The thing is, the Dark Ones, they're not as evil as it's made out to be, because whenever they've allegedly attacked, they were actually trying to communicate with the humans, but this led to people dying or going insane, except for Artyom, who has a gift that prevents this from happening because he had an encounter with them when he was little. And I also find it absolutely hilarious that the only person who can communicate with the Dark Ones is a mute, but you have two endings. The canon ending, which is also the bad ending, which involves obliterating the Dark Ones, leading on to Last Light. And you also have the good, air quotes, ending, which you can only get if you have enough moral points, that spares the Dark Ones. But now that I've explained it, the story, it's not fantastic or anything, but you do have moments where you care for not only the main characters, but also the random little civilians that you might have encountered throughout your story. But according to the author of the novel, he says a main theme is that humans' reaction to foreign beings is that if they're hard to understand, our first instinct is to resort to violence and eradicating them by all means necessary. But more of this is explored in Last Light, which is also a fantastic game. But let's move on to the gameplay portion. There is a wide variety of gameplay elements that you'll encounter in this game. It can range from stealth portions to dramatic railcar chases, to more lore-rich moments as you follow someone through the tunnels and they explain the backstory of the political situation of the metro, as well as what life was like before the bombs fell. Now, stealth as a whole can be a mixed bag. In the original Metro 2033, it was pretty ass and non-existent from what I've been told, and while they implemented it in the Redux version, I wouldn't say it's fully fleshed out, because you'll have moments where they act blind, deaf, and dumb, but other times they can have hyper senses. Similar to the Stalker games, I strongly recommend that you play this on the hardest difficulty, because it really amplifies the survival aspect by forcing you to play smarter, by not wasting your resources, which becomes scarcer the more you bump up the difficulty. Now, Fallout has the infamous saying,
War never changes.
Stalker has, the original Resident Evil has,
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
and in Metros, it is,
If it's hostile, you kill it.
because you have many different kinds of mutants that range from mutated dogs, weird bat-like creatures, and even gargoyle-looking things. It is evident that they did get some inspiration from the Stalker games, but honestly, I'm not complaining. And leading on from that, shotguns are the weapon of choice when dealing with them, but the cool thing is, I like the gameplay design of the shotguns. While very powerful, they have a long reload animation, leading you to feel overwhelmed at times, which definitely adds to the stress, because you also need to keep an eye on your mask filter. Speaking of those, the radiation is still a major problem on the surface, since it takes place only 20 years after the bombs fell, rather than 200 years like in Fallout, or the 20 years in Stalker since the Chernobyl disaster, but that really was a completely different thing. I just thought it was a fun fact. But in Metro, it's a constant battle trying to find mask filters that only last a couple of minutes on the surface. And this is great because it can make you panic when you get down to only a couple of minutes and you end up getting lost. Even though this game is very linear, you can get lost at times, which definitely adds to the stress. But there are also more management mechanics, such as you have to manage your battery level by pulling out a separate device to charge it up, and if you're not paying attention, you could be left in the dark in the most inconvenient moments, coupled with the NVGs, which I personally didn't like to use because it does drain the battery much faster and it was a little harder to see things, but it also means you're practically invisible to the enemies. There's also something satisfying about pumping the battery. I don't know, it just feels really nice to do. An interesting mechanic in this game is how currency works. The older but more reliable bullets can be used to purchase goods and, well, services, which is shown in in Last Light, but you have moments where you can give these expensive bullets to poor people, increasing your morality. But a cool mechanic is that if you run out of all your ammo, you can use these bullets as a last resort. They're more powerful and they can burn the enemy, and it just means that you're literally burning money, but in some moments it calls for it. But let's talk about the guns you have at your disposal, and each have a unique role. We already talked about how shotguns are better against mutants. Pistols and the Tika, which I have no footage of because it would crash my game whenever I'd buy it, are great for stealth, but you need to pump the Tika as well as the flamethrower, which is great in enclosed spaces to burn multiple mutants at once. You've got the Asval, the Kalash, which are great for mowing down lots of enemies when things inevitably get hot. The actual gun handling itself is pretty nice. It doesn't have that stalker-like aim system where a perfectly aimed shot ends up in Moldova, but it's pretty accurate, causing stealth to not be too much of a nightmare. All it takes is a couple of hits to kill them, but this also applies to you on higher difficulties. In the original Metro 2033, they didn't have weapon customization from what I've been told. However, in the Redux version they do, which can allow you to sort of mix and match on the type of playstyle that you want. You can attach a longer barrel to the revolver if you want to do long range kills, or you can attach a silencer and a red dot sight if you want to be more precise and stealthy at close quarters. Mutants on the other hand can be pretty tanky, but you can run away from them in certain areas at the cost of you missing lots of loot scattered throughout the world, as well as these books that you can pick up that give you an idea of what Artyom is thinking in the moment. But we have to talk about the atmosphere, because while the gameplay isn't that hard, I feel like the main focus of this game isn't about the gunfights or the gameplay itself, but the world that's built, and immersing yourself in it and feeling like you are really in a hellhole fighting for survival of the human race against an unknown entity. And this leads me on to the atmosphere of the game, which definitely is the strongest aspect. The lighting greatly helps, especially with the shadows, by making things feel really sinister. And when you couple it with the soundtrack, which at times can be really low and calm, and it can pick up and go really loud when things go south. I can't forget the distant sounds of beasts growling and causing you to think if something is watching you, and the sounds of rusted metal moving.
Nice little grill. I promise you, dear, I will come back and lubricate you.
And I also just love how you can get stuck in cobwebs or slow down unless you whip out your lighter, which can also illuminate your little clipboard that can tell you what your current task is. It all really adds, and I love it. Your gas mask can take damage and eventually break. This leads to your vision becoming obscured, and heaven forbid it breaks whilst you're up on the surface, because you'll have a limit of time to find a replacement or to get to safety. There is no weapon degradation mechanic until Exodus, but people hated that in Far Cry 2, and I mean, I don't blame people for not liking that mechanic, but I personally liked it. But another cool thing is, if you get blood splatter on your mask, you can manually wipe it off, letting you see better. Also, flies can get in your face if you're near dead bodies, to further show that this is a decaying, rotten corpse, and if there are flies flying around it, can you imagine how it smells down there? But all in all, Metro is a cinematic and atmospheric experience, and a game series that I suggest you must play, especially if you like things post-apocalyptic as well as the Stalker series, as it's evident they got a couple of things from that game. But nonetheless, I hope you enjoyed today's video, because if you did, please do leave a like and subscribe and share this video with your friends. Anyways, my name is Tan2, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Peace.